The day my uncle died, my cousins finally showed me who they really were. I'd always known, in that quiet, uncomfortable way you know something, but never say out loud. I'd seen the small cruelties. The way they'd talk over me at family dinners. The way my aunt would smile at their jokes and look straight through me, like I was furniture she'd chosen not to buy. But knowing something and having it confirmed are two different things, and the day of Uncle Gerald's funeral was the day I stopped pretending I didn't know. Uncle Gerald wasn't my father's brother. He was my mother's uncle, her father's younger brother, which made him my great uncle, technically. But he was the one who showed up to my college graduation when my own parents forgot to book the flight. He was the one who mailed me a card every birthday, always with a 20 tucked inside, even when I was 31 and didn't need the 20. He was just that kind of man. Steady. Warm. The kind who remembered. He'd never married. Never had kids of his own. His whole life was the printing business he'd built from nothing in Raleigh, North Carolina. 40 years of waking up at 5 in the morning, of ink-stained hands, of knowing every single one of his 42 employees by name and asking about their kids. He sold the business 6 years ago to a regional chain and retired quietly to a house in the hills with a garden and a stack of library books he never quite got through fast enough. When he died of a heart attack in October, he was 74. And he left almost everything to me. I didn't know that until the reading of the will. The attorney's name was Mr. Caldwell, a quiet man in his 60s with reading glasses he kept pushing up his nose. He had an office downtown, the kind with dark wood paneling and diplomas nobody reads. My aunt showed up with my two cousins, Brendan, who is 43 and has never held a job longer than 18 months, and Claudia, who is 38 and has the specific energy of someone who has always believed the world owes her something. My mother was there too, sitting slightly apart from everyone else, the way she always does in rooms where tension has a seat at the table. I sat in the corner chair. I had my work bag with me because I'd come straight from the office. I'm a senior financial analyst at an accounting firm, have been for 6 years. Before that, I spent 3 years as a staff auditor. Numbers are my language. Spreadsheets are where I'm most at home. Nobody in that room knew that about me in any meaningful way because nobody in that room had ever asked. Mr. Caldwell began reading. The house went to a local land trust, per Uncle Gerald's wishes. He'd arranged that himself years ago and had told me about it once over the phone. Said he didn't want family fighting over bricks and mortar. Some money went to his church. A smaller sum went to a former employee whose daughter had a medical condition, and then Mr. Caldwell said my name. The full amount came to just over $1.1 million. The printing business sale, decades of careful saving, a modest investment portfolio he'd built himself by reading library books about index funds. All of it, structured into a trust in my name, with me named as sole beneficiary. The room went very quiet. I heard Brendan exhale. It wasn't a sigh. It was the sound of someone recalibrating. My aunt's face did something complicated. She pressed her lips together and looked at her hands. Claudia turned to look at me. Slowly. The way you turn to look at something you've decided you're not going to like, and said nothing. My mother said, "That can't be right." Mr. Caldwell assured her it was right, that this was a properly executed trust document with no ambiguities, and that he was happy to answer questions. Brendan asked if there was any provision for other family members. Mr. Caldwell said no. Claudia asked if the trust could be contested. Mr. Caldwell said she was welcome to consult her own attorney. I said nothing during any of this. I just sat there with my hands folded in my lap and thought about the birthday cards, the $20 bills, the voicemails Uncle Gerald used to leave. Always too long, always wandering off topic. Always ending with, "Call me back when you get a chance. Sweetheart, no rush." I cried in my car afterward. Not from sadness, though there was sadness in it too. Mostly from something I didn't have a word for then and still don't entirely, except that it felt like being seen from a great distance by someone who is no longer there to tell you they saw you. The calls started 4 days later. Brendan called first. He opened with small talk, which was unusual enough that I knew immediately something was coming. He asked how I was holding up. I said I was okay. He said he was too, that it had been a hard week, that Uncle Gerald had been such a big part of all their lives. I agreed. There was a pause, and then he said, carefully, that he and Claudia and my aunt had been talking, and they felt like there might be some things worth discussing about the estate. I said I was listening. He said they felt the distribution wasn't entirely fair, that my aunt had been very close to Uncle Gerald, that she'd visited him regularly, that she'd helped him after his hip surgery 2 years ago. I didn't point out that I'd driven to Raleigh 4 times during that same period, that I'd sat with him in the hospital, that I'd organized his prescriptions into a weekly pill tray because his hands weren't steady enough anymore. I didn't say any of that. I just said I understood they were disappointed. He said disappointed wasn't the word. He said they were considering their options. I said I hoped they'd find a good attorney, and I hung up. What I didn't tell Brendan, what I didn't tell anyone, was that I had already been considering my options too. I'd had 6 months' warning. Uncle Gerald had called me in April, 6 months before he died. He was already having some heart trouble, already on a new medication that made him tired, and he called me on a Tuesday evening and said he wanted to talk about practical things. He said he'd updated his trust documents. He told me what was in them. And then he said, very gently, that he expected my cousins might not take it well and that I should be prepared. He said, "They're going to tell you that you manipulated me. That's what people say when they don't get what they expected. Don't let it shake you." I asked him if he was worried. He said, "No. I've been very deliberate. Everything is documented. I just want you to be ready." I was ready. After Uncle Gerald's call in April, I did what I always do when I need to understand something. I researched. I spent 3 weeks reading about trust litigation, about undue influence claims, about the kinds of challenges families bring when a will or trust doesn't go the way they expected. I read case studies. I read court decisions. I read everything I could find on the North Carolina statutes governing trust administration, and then I called a trust litigation attorney named Mr. Prescott, who had an office in Chapel Hill and 40 years of experience and a manner so calm he could probably explain a tornado without raising his voice. I paid for 2 consultations out of my own pocket. He told me what my cousins would need to prove to successfully contest the trust, and what evidence would be most useful in defending it. I spent the next 4 months building that file. I had phone records showing the regularity of my conversations with Uncle Gerald, calls averaging 40 minutes, several times a month, going back years. I had photos from my visits. I had a letter he had written to me the previous Christmas in his own handwriting, telling me what I had meant to him over the years. I had testimony from his neighbor who had spoken to Uncle Gerald regularly and from his former business partner who had known him for 30 years and would be happy to attest to his clarity of mind. I had a letter from his doctor confirming he had been of sound mind at the time the trust documents were executed, with no diagnosis of any cognitive impairment whatsoever. And I had Uncle Gerald's own video, recorded with his attorney present in June, in which he sat in his living room for 47 minutes and explained, in his own words, exactly why he was leaving what he was leaving to who he was leaving it to. He talked about me. He talked about my cousins. He was measured and clear and specific, and at the end he looked directly at the camera and said, "I want the record to show that I made this decision freely, fully informed, and without any pressure from anyone." I had all of this saved to a secure cloud drive organized into folders, indexed and labeled. My cousins filed suit in January. The claim was undue influence. The argument was that I had Uncle Gerald from the rest of the family, cultivated a disproportionate relationship with him, and used that relationship to influence the disposition of his estate. Their attorney was a woman named Miss Hargrove, who had a reputation for aggressive trust litigation. She was good. I could tell that from her filings, which were thorough and well-constructed. I read every document the moment it arrived. My aunt called me the week after the suit was filed. She didn't start with small talk this time. She said she hoped I understood that this wasn't personal. I said that it felt fairly personal. She said the family had a right to what was fair. I asked her what made her believe she knew better than Uncle Gerald what was fair. She didn't answer that. She said they were willing to settle, that if I agreed to split the trust 3 ways, they'd drop the suit. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 48 hours. I thought about the phone calls, the birthday cards, the 4 trips to Raleigh, the 2 consultations with Mr. Prescott, the 4 months of documentation. I thought about Uncle Gerald sitting in his living room in June, looking into a camera and saying I made this decision freely. I called my aunt back and said no. The hearing was in March. I wore a gray blazer I'd had for 4 years and carried a single accordion folder organized into 6 tabbed sections. My cousins showed up with my aunt and Ms. Hargrove and a paralegal and a whole rolling cart of materials. Brendan was in a suit I'd never seen before. Claudia had clearly been to a salon. They both looked at me when I walked in, and the look was not hostile. It was almost pitying, which was somehow worse, like they had already decided how this would go and felt sorry for me that I didn't know it yet. I took my seat at the table across from them. The judge was a woman in her late 50s named Judge Whitmore. She had an expression that gave away nothing. She had clearly heard a great deal of this before. Miss Hargrove opened. She was composed and persuasive, laying out the timeline of my increased contact with Uncle Gerald in his later years, framing it as strategic rather than genuine. She noted that other family members had meaningful relationships with him too. She said the disproportion of the distribution suggested influence had been exerted. She was good. When it was my turn, I didn't present myself as an attorney, because I'm not an attorney. I presented myself as exactly what I am, a financial analyst who spent 6 months preparing a factual record. I walked Judge Whitmore through the documentation section by section. The call logs, the visit records, the neighbor's statement, the business partner's statement, the doctor's letter, Uncle Gerald's written letter to me. And then I played the video. The courtroom was very quiet for 47 minutes. When it finished, I looked up at Ms. Hargrove. She was making a note on her legal pad and not looking at anyone. I looked at my cousins. Brendan's jaw was set. Claudia was staring at the table. I looked at my aunt. She was looking at her hands. Judge Whitmore asked Ms. Hargrove if she had any response to the video documentation. Ms. Hargrove said she needed a recess to confer with her clients. Judge Whitmore gave them 20 minutes. They were back in 12. Ms. Hargrove stood and said that after consultation with her clients they were withdrawing the suit. Judge Whitmore looked at me. She said I had been thorough. She said, and I will remember this for a long time, that it was clear the decedent had taken considerable care to document his own intentions and that the court found no basis whatsoever for any claim of undue influence. She dismissed the case. I walked out of that courthouse into a cold March afternoon and sat in my car in the parking garage and did not cry. I had thought I might. I sat there for a while instead, hands on the steering wheel, thinking about nothing in particular. The pigeons on the top level of the garage, the sound of a car starting somewhere above me, the way the light was coming through the concrete slats. I thought about Uncle Gerald in his living room in June, in the blue cardigan he always wore when he was at home, the way he'd look directly at the camera, the steadiness of him. I thought about what it means when someone sees you clearly and decides, deliberately, to say so. Nobody from my family reached out after the hearing. Not that day, not the week after. 2 months later, my aunt sent a 1-sentence text that said she hoped I was doing well. I did not respond. I still have the birthday cards, a whole stack of them in a shoebox in my closet, going back to when I was in my 20s. Some of them have the $20 bills still tucked inside. I kept them all. I couldn't explain why, except that they felt like evidence of something, not the kind you present in a courtroom, but the kind you keep for yourself. The kind that reminds you what was real. The trust closed earlier this year. I paid off my student loans. I put a significant portion into a diversified index fund. Uncle Gerald would have approved of that specifically. I kept enough liquid to be comfortable, and I set aside a smaller amount for the local library system in Raleigh, because it's where Uncle Gerald got the books about investing that helped him build the very thing he left to me, and that felt right. I still work at the firm. I still like my job. I like numbers. I like the way they don't lie. I think about what Uncle Gerald said to me in April, over the phone in that last long conversation when he told me what he'd decided. At the end of the call, before we hung up, He said something I've turned over 100 times since. He said, "I'm not worried about you. I never have been. I just wanted you to know." I said, "I know, Uncle Gerald." He said, "Good. Now tell me about that new project you're working on." And we talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important, and it was one of the best phone calls I've ever had. There's a shoebox in my closet with a stack of birthday cards in it. Some of them still have the $20 bills tucked inside. I never spent them. I'm not entirely sure why. I think part of me knew, even before I could have articulated it, that they were proof of something. Not the legal kind, the other kind. What happened in that courtroom in March wasn't luck. It wasn't fate. It was the direct result of choices. Choices Uncle Gerald made over decades. Choices I made over 6 months. And choices my cousins made the moment they decided that greed was a strategy. Every single thing that happened in that hearing was already determined long before anyone sat down at that table. That's the part people don't want to hear, because it means outcomes aren't random. They're earned. They accumulate quietly the way interest does, and then one day someone opens a statement and sees the total and either smiles or doesn't. Uncle Gerald was an honest man. He kept his word. He paid his employees fairly. He didn't cut corners. He built a life that had integrity in it, not as a performance, not for anyone else's benefit, but because that was simply how he operated. And the result of that, 30 or 40 years later, was that his neighbor was willing to write a statement on his behalf. His former business partner picked up the phone without hesitation. His doctor signed a letter. His attorney sat in a room with a camera and documented everything with care. All of those people showed up for Uncle Gerald because his Uncle Gerald had shown up for them in smaller ways for years. That's not coincidence. That's what a life of basic decency actually produces when you follow it far enough downstream. I think about the 6 months I spent preparing, the evenings I gave up, the consultations I paid for out of my own savings, the spreadsheets, the indexed folders, the call logs printed and tabbed and organized. A lot of people, when they feel wronged, spend that energy being angry. I understand that impulse. I felt it too. But anger by itself doesn't build a case. What builds a case is sitting down and thinking clearly about what you know, what you can prove, and what a judge actually needs to see. That kind of thinking, calm, methodical, precise, is something I've spent my whole career developing, and for the first time in my life, I understood exactly why it mattered beyond a spreadsheet. And then there was just the matter of not quitting. My aunt offered a settlement. Part of me, the tired part, the part that was already exhausted from months of preparation, considered it. It would have been easier. Easier to take a third, call it done, move on. But Uncle Gerald had sat in his living room in June and looked directly into a camera and said he made his decision freely. Walking away from that for the sake of convenience felt like a betrayal of the only person in my family who had ever really seen me. So I didn't walk away. I think that's what it comes down to when you strip everything else away. Not cleverness, not even justice. Just the decision, made quietly and without drama, to honor what was real, and then doing the work required to back that decision up with something a judge could actually look at. The trust is closed now. The money is in index funds. And I still have the birthday cards.